In 2009, the world was introduced to Platinum Games' Bayonetta, and it was good. Years later, she re-emerged on Wii U, before appearing on the PC just last year. Many thought that this was the end, but Nintendo has another plan. The original Bayonetta has returned once again, this time on Nintendo Switch. Packaged together with Bayonetta 2, just like the original Wii U release, the latest version of Bayonetta on Switch has the potential to stand out as the best console version of the game. For this video, we're going to focus on the differences we found between the various versions of Bayonetta and, most importantly, the performance. Let's get started. To begin with, just like we saw with Bayonetta 2 on the Switch, this new version of the prequel operates at just 1280 by 720, like every other console version of the game. On the surface, this is disappointing, but as we'll discover later, there are certainly benefits to this approach as well. That's not to say that there haven't been some improvements made to the general image quality, however. Let's start with a look at docked mode, which compared to Wii U exhibits slightly improved texture filtering like we saw in Bayonetta 2. The difference, though, is so subtle that it may as well come down to a difference in hardware implementation rather than an actual setting. There's also a subtle difference in the way models are presented against depth of field, with edge aliasing reduced ever so slightly on Switch compared to the Wii U version. There's also a subtle difference in how shading is handled across its environments. And with the way bloom lighting is presented, which appears more intense on the Switch compared to both the Wii U and PC versions of the game. We also noticed a slight variation in texture clarity between the two versions. The basic assets appear mostly identical, but when you zoom in on a character, you can spot some minor differences. The glove texture on Wii U, for instance, appears to exhibit additional compression artifacts. At least, that's the impression I get. What do you guys think? Now, if we bring the PC version back in, the increased resolution and higher quality shadows certainly stand out as an advantage, but the overall texture quality appears to be about the same really, which kinda makes sense since all the versions are likely derived from the Xbox 360 original anyways. At 720p then, the Switch version lacks the clarity and sharpness of the PC presentation, but ultimately looks pretty similar anyways as a result of its legacy. Speaking of Xbox 360, here's how Switch stacks up against that original release. There is a difference in how the shadows are rendered, and the 360 version appears slightly more vibrant overall, but it's ultimately very similar, and even the bloom is rendered a lot like 360 on the Switch. The big question here though centers on performance, which we'll get to momentarily. If you're looking for higher quality visuals, then you're really not going to find it here. But what about the handheld mode? Well, like its sequel, Bayonetta on the Switch runs at 720p in both docked and handheld mode, which means it looks nice and sharp on the Switch's LCD screen. To deliver smooth performance though, some compromises were necessary. Texture filtering quality, for instance, takes a significant hit, falling well below the docked mode. Shadow resolution is also modified slightly between the two, as you can see here. Still, on the small screen, these changes aren't really a problem, and the game winds up looking astoundingly nice as a portable title. So if visual quality is pretty much consistent between the various console releases, what benefits do you get on the Switch? The answer, as you might have guessed, is performance. Bayonetta on Switch now delivers a frame rate that manages to nearly lock itself at 60 frames per second. This introduction fight, for instance, is always a great test due to the number of effects and enemies on screen. We're looking at the game running here on the Switch in its docked mode, and the results are quite good, I think. There are still some minor drops here and there, but overall the game comes very close to hitting its target 60 frames per second at all times. Which begs the question then, how does this run on Wii U? Well, it's immediately evident that this busy scene presents a problem for the system. It's still smooth enough to enjoy, mind you, but clearly the Switch has a massive advantage in this battle. The poor old Wii U simply cannot hit or maintain its target frame rate throughout.
Dwellers of the darkness and the lumen sages control.
If you've played the game previously on the Wii U then, clearly Switch offers a much better, more consistent experience all around. So how about the Xbox 360 then? Well, rather than simply test the 360 hardware itself, I felt it made more sense to look at an option that might fit modern users more in 2018, and that is Xbox 360 backwards compatibility on the Xbox One. So what we're looking at here then is the same introduction scene running on an Xbox One X at 720p. The end result, interestingly enough, is very similar to the Switch version, but the X is doing all of this via emulation. Now, keep in mind that the original Xbox 360 version exhibits screen tearing and slowdown in this scene, so Switch is definitely improved over that version, but compared to Xbox One X, it's a close battle. Our next little test case involves the depth of field effect. This activates when you finish a battle, and on Wii U, it drops the frame rate rather noticeably when it's on screen. On the Switch, however, it never misses a beat, suggesting that the system has a noticeable advantage here when displaying depth of field. The same is true of scenes with lots of particles and alpha effects. On Wii U, this battle kicks off with your opponent crashing through a fountain, and it absolutely tanks the frame rate on Wii U. These types of effects are precisely where the system struggles most. Over on the Switch, however, we see a few drops here as well, but it is less severe overall, and the system manages to recover more quickly, restoring us back to a 60 frames per second experience. When you get to heavy scenes like this, the Switch is just a whole lot smoother than Wii U. There's another scene later which really puts this to the test as well. As the lava rushes down the street, you can run over and hang out on this crashed streetcar, allowing the effects to creep up on you. As you can see, however, this has a dramatic hit on performance. The limited bandwidth of the Switch pushes it to the breaking point. This is not a typical scenario, mind you, but it still shows what can cause the system to drop. If we switch over to the Wii U though, the results are even more disastrous, with a momentary dip below 30 frames per second even. It's really punishing for the poor Wii U. Now on Xbox One X, however, this scene demonstrates the extra GPU power available to the console. Despite running through emulation, the system has no trouble handling 360's bandwidth heavy effects in this scene, enabling smooth performance even when those particles are all over the place. The Switch advantage over Wii U continues then throughout all of our tests. The frame rate regularly dips below 60 FPS on Wii U, while the Switch, in most scenes at least, has little trouble hitting solid 60. You'll get your fair share of dips here and there, but still, it's a good experience. Now, to be fair to the Wii U version, this level of performance is roughly on par, or maybe slightly slower than the original Xbox 360 version, so at the time it seemed pretty acceptable. 2018, however, the shortcomings are a lot more evident. So, while it's true that the visuals on Switch may lack any noticeable enhancements over the previous console releases, the performance receives a boost great enough to sort of offset it. What I find interesting this time around, however, is how well the Xbox One X handles the game when using emulation. Overall performance between Switch and Xbox One is very, very close, but those super alpha-heavy scenes still have an advantage on Microsoft's console. Just something to consider if you already happen to own the game on Xbox 360 and have an Xbox One X. But of course, you can't play Bayonetta 2 there, so this package is still a very nice thing to have. That's not the end of the performance improvements, however. Switch also trounces the Wii U when it comes to loading times. There are numerous loading screens throughout the game, and while they're entertaining enough to play around on, it's nice to get into the action faster, and this is possible on the Switch. Overall then, Bayonetta on Switch is a solid version of the game, let down only by its rather low docked resolution of 720p. The performance is much faster overall than previous console releases, at least on its native hardware. The only console with an advantage over the Switch is Xbox One X playing the 360 original. Oh, and of course there's that PC version as well, which is great too. Still, as a complete retail package, it's great having both this and Bayonetta 2 together without the significant performance issues that we found in the Wii U version. And if you've never played Bayonetta before, be sure to give it a look. It's one of the best action games ever made, and it still holds up beautifully today. That's all for now though. If you enjoyed this little slice of Bayonetta talk, be sure to like, subscribe, and follow us over on Twitter. And until next time, this is John signing off.